Good evening and welcome to the first Tisky Sour since our election sesh on Thursday, where obviously we spent about 6 hours absorbing some very disappointing results. We've had a couple of days now to think about what's just happened, to think about explanations for what's just happened and what might come next. To talk about that now, I am joined by Huda Elmi.
Hello.
Who is a member of the Labour Party NEC and a member of the regional board in the West Midlands, one part of the country where we had fairly disappointing results in general. I'm also joined by Aaron Bastani, co-founder of Novara Media. How are you doing?
I'm as well as can be expected. Turning off notifications on your phone, my answer.
Oh
no, I ruined it.
You ruined it. I was going to do that very smoothly just because
you were actually very... I ruined that. My apologies, Michael. I've undermined the ever professional, imperiously professional Michael Walker.
Okay, we'll start the discussion with a breakdown of what happened last Thursday. So Labour lost 59 seats. They went down to 203 seats, the lowest since 1935. The vote share went down from 43.6% in 2017 to 32.1% last week. Sorry, that was wrong. The vote share was 43.6% for the Conservatives and 32.1% for the Labour Party, down on the part of the Labour Party from 40%. The Conservatives only added 1.2%. Predominantly in Leave voting seats is where we lost ground. Some seats that went Tory. Rother Valley in South Yorkshire has been Labour since 1918. Newcastle under Lyme has been Labour since 1919. But the Labour candidate only won by 30 votes in 2017, so we can see that it is a decline that's been going on a while. In Lee, that was Labour since 1922, now has a 10,000 Tory majority. So there's some seats that went from Labour to being safe Tory seats in one evening. We also lost Don Valley, Bishop's Auckland, Sedgefield, Bassett Law and Great Grimsby. They've all been Labour held since World War II. Some sort of spectacular disappointments of the night was losing Laura Pidcock's seat in northwest Durham. Comparing the vote share to 2010 and 2015, it doesn't look out of the ordinary. In 2010, Labour got 29%, and 2015,
the Tories
30.4%.
The Tories don't have a majority of 10,000 in Lee. You sure it's the right seat?
Let's look it up.
It's 2,000.
Oh, was it only 2,000?
Yeah, I didn't think that was right.
Well, the article I read misled me.
Who's this? Which article is this?
I don't know. I'll look it up when we're talking about the next thing. So it's only a 2,000.
It's 2,000. There are some really horrific ones, like Grimsby's pretty. There's quite a few. Maybe you're thinking of Bassett Law. Yeah. Bassett Law is pretty bad.
I can find my source. But in any case, what's to blame? Huda.
Oh, God. It's a whole coalition of completely loads of different things. And I think that anybody saying that it was just like pinpointing on just one thing is, can I swear? It's just like chatting absolute shit. And I think that like activists, journalists, political commentators, MPs, the political establishment, everyone has kind of been talking a lot about what it could be. But I think that the overarching thing is that this isn't, and I think you touched on it in your opening, I think this is the product of what has been quite steady decline. And I think that we are kind of facing the harsh realities of what has been decades of complete detachment from working class communities. And I think that this election convinced me of what I think all of us to some extent have known for a long time, and that is that whilst the party membership exploded, whilst excitement exploded, whilst we swelled to the largest, party in Western Europe, this didn't and hasn't translated to tangibly being able to impact and speak to working class communities. And I think that for us to address what we've done wrong, I think there's no sexy, easy answer to it. But I think that the big thing that kind of, when I think about it, really saddens me in all of this is that what we saw was us going into an election with the best and most left-wing leader that our party has ever had. A manifesto, whilst not everything is completely perfect about it, was one of the best our party has ever had, and talked about mass redistribution of wealth, talked about completely changing the balance of power in society, and was completely to the interests of the same grouping and same class of people that kind of went against us and turned against us and were peeled away by very quite regressive forces in our country. And I think that if I was to talk about what I think was the biggest catalyst to us becoming detached from working class communities, I would have to say that that is a complete decimation of the institutions, community institutions that we've seen in our country, when we've got lack of community spaces, when we've got complete like breakdown in education when it comes to not just providing opportunities, but providing an understanding of self. I can't remember where I saw it, but there was a whole kind of like really good article about how in some of the mining towns and villages and cities, for instance, you know, on the curriculum, there isn't anything to do with mining, there isn't anything to do with the miners' strike. But I think that is evocative of like, we can kind of draw that out and say that there has been a complete detachment of people of their own history of struggle and a complete detachment and ability to organise. When I was campaigning, I met somebody who'd been a party member for 40 plus years. And he talked about how CLPs used to be places where whole streets used to meet. And that isn't the case anymore. We're dealing with an infrastructure in terms of a party where we have some CLPs that have completely, you know, exploded in the same way that our party membership have exploded. And I think in a lot of the seats that we've lost, we've seen, you know, a lot of them are CLPs that are quite moribund. And the only time they're active is really election time. May they be local elections, may they be general elections. So I think that, you know, this is a disaster because of the vulnerable people that are going to be impacted most by this Conservative government. But I think if we're going to learn anything, it's that the one thing that we need to do is organise in communities a lot better. And I think that needs to be the biggest strategic priority that our party has moving forward. And I'm sure we'll touch on all of the campaign points and, you know, Brexit, et cetera, But I think my big thing is that there has been a complete breakdown in community bonds. And that has been the biggest success that this Conservative government has had. It's breaking down those community bonds. And that when people say, I'm working class, like, what does that mean? Like, genuinely to a lot of people, they don't have those class interests anymore. And that has been, you know, on purpose. That has been broken down. People have been, you know, the bonds of society have been broken. And I think that that's where we need to start.
Aaron, you're completely right about Lee. I don't know where I got that from. It was only now a 2,000 Tory majority. And you're right about Bassett Law, which is now a 14,000 Tory majority.
And it's been Labour since like the 1920s, which is just crazy.
Now the Conservatives got double the number of votes that Labour did, 28,000 to 14,000.
Which is crazy.
Absolute landslide in that constituency.
I mean, I would obviously, I'd compound what you said, Huda, but I would also say that, you know, I think the frame of most people recognise they're working class people. And I think actually that's why the Tories did so well. The Tories appealed to working class people as working class people. If you look at, for instance, there were those 4 candidates that came down from Teesside, or 4 or 5 candidates that came down from Teesside. One of them took a picture they posted to their Twitter account. And you look at a lot of the new Tory MPs, obviously a lot of them come from think tanks, finance, ex-lawyers, but actually quite a few of them are local people from their communities. And there's been a significant shift in the kind of person that is a Tory MP from a career politician inside the Westminster bubble to people who don't really want to do politics as usual. And it's terrifying, but Labour failed to do that. And the Tories did capture it. So to an extent, you're right. But also, I think people voted for change. They thought change meant the Tories. They thought the insurgent anti-establishment candidate was Boris Johnson. And they felt that actually looking out for their communities meant voting Tory rather than for the Labour Party. And the thing about local parties being moribund, absolutely true. But Bassett Law is a great example. Bassett Law, formerly John Mann's seat, you know, it's one of those, this has been 20 years in the making, losing Bassett Law. 20 years in the making. All of these seats have been the same. Year after year, basically since 2001. They went to marginals by 2010. A lot of these places, Grimsby's now this marginal. Grimsby was a marginal in 2010. Labour, one of the really fascinating differences is Labour got 29% in 2010. It's just got 32%. And it kept many, many, many more seats in 2010. Why? Scotland, right? You basically have to take 50 seats out of the equation. So people saying, the lowest number of seats, I'm not really telling you the whole picture because now Labour has a very different task on its hands. 2010 in many ways was, I think it was the nadir for Labour in many ways, given that they weren't up against a particularly powerful Tory party, didn't have a powerful message, which couldn't even get a majority. But in terms of the moribund local parties, I mean, in Bassett Law, a Remainer was selected as the candidate, and then they were overturned by the NEC. You know, so I think that there's a tension there, you know. And I think that one of the tensions within the Corbin project was, we didn't invigorate local parties across the country. I say we. I need to stop saying we because it's not happened. It's over. It failed to invigorate local parties across the country. But at the same time, it wasn't willing to make the trade-offs where local people felt empowered and basically exercise democratic control over the party. I think a lot of that was just talk. And so it's difficult to reinvigorate a political party when people at the bottom don't feel like they've got agency and power to change things.
I think kind of building on what you said as well, I think that you sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of seeing the Conservatives as anti-establishment. And in a lot of those places, they're places that have had Labour councils and Labour MPs for a very long time. And I think it's also interesting to say, because I think, particularly anecdotally on the doorstep, a lot of the things that people would blame this, Labour councils and Labour MPs on would be things that, particularly when it comes to cuts that couldn't be helped at a much wider scale. But that's not to be said that there wasn't things that could have been done to mitigate it, and there couldn't have been things done to kind of ensure that there is some level of kind of transformation happening at a local level that could prove what Labour in power means. So I think you're completely right. I think that this was a long time in the making, but again, the fact that all the chickens came to roost now, when we had a political agenda and a political framework that was popular. If it wasn't popular, we wouldn't be as big of a party as we are, right? It was popular, and I think we did cross. Our message did cross. It did reach people. I just don't think. I just think our issue is that all of those communities have been hollowed out, and the basis in which we can organise was made impossible in a lot of places.
We're going to look at what the polls were saying about why people voted in a moment. First of all, you're watching Tisky Sour, you're watching Novara Media. As you know, this show is only possible because of your kind support. If you were already subscribed, thank you very much. If not, please go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. As ever, like this video. Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter. If you tweet with the hashtag Tisky Sour, then we'll pick out some of your comments and questions at the end of the show. I think we're going to have a show most nights this week. Tomorrow, hopefully, I've got Ash and Ian Lavery on Wednesday. Paul Mason's coming on. I know he's split opinion among some of our Novara Media audience at the moment over the issue of a people's vote, but that will be a very interesting conversation to have. On Thursday, we are not having a show because there is a Novara Media party. So if you are disappointed by this election result, come and drown your sorrows with good comrades and good friends. It will be at Brixton Jam, and you can buy tickets at buytickets.at, the word at, /Novara Media.
A lot of people in the comments saying, Paul Mason, why for fuck's sake? And then another is, free Paul from Area 52. Well, make sure you tune in tomorrow, Wednesday night. And then you can put these questions to him, like, what's Area 52 actually like? Isn't it Area 51? Anyway.
I think it's 51.
It's Area 51, right? Yeah, that's
come with your questions. I mean, he's good at answering questions.
He's he's too good at answering questions. He's too persuasive.
Let's look at a poll done by Opinion, which has been widely shared on Twitter. The main reasons voters did not vote for Labour. So when you look at all who did not vote Labour, which, to be honest, is kind of a meaningless question because, most of them weren't going to vote anyway. 43% said the leadership, 17% said Brexit, 12% said their economic policies. If you're looking at all Labour defectors in total, so that's people who voted Labour in 2017 but not in 2019, you got 37% saying the leadership, 21% saying Brexit, and 6% saying their economic policies. And probably the most significant group, Labour defectors to the Conservatives, 45% say the leadership, 31% say their stance on Brexit, and 6% say their economic policies. We will talk about the policies in a moment, but they seem to get off scot-free.
Sample size for that survey?
I don't know what the sample size is. In any case...
Is that Lord Ashcroft stuff?
That's Lord Ashcroft, right. Yeah. Lord Ashcroft and Opinion.
Pretty robust, yeah.
And also, it seems to match with most people's experience on the doorstep, right? Corbin was a problem.
You shouldn't. Data shouldn't be used. Oh, it agrees with my personal experience. You're meant to use data as that's deductive reasoning. Yeah, that's why we have data.
So you can go through the data tables if you want, Aaron, and dispute this.
No. I believe the data tables. I'm just saying that, they in and of themselves are valuable, rather than saying, that sort of is congruent with my experience on the doorstep, because everybody has different experience on the doorstep, obviously. How
should people respond to that information? The fact that 45% of people who defected the Conservatives said the problem was the leadership. What do you make of that?
I don't think the problem was people defecting to the Conservatives. Turnout was about 1.5% lower than it was last time. That's the first thing. Mm-hmm. So if you had... Labour had to not just not have turnout drop, it had to have turnout go up by 2 or 3% on last time. So there's 3 or 4% of the electorate which didn't vote, which Labour needed to get out. That's one thing. Then you have in about, I think, 11 of the 12 closest Tory-held seats today, the Green vote's bigger than the Green vote, not the Lib Dem vote, the Green vote. When you think Labour was running on a position of a Green New Deal, decarbonising by 2030, crazy. So I think there's lots of things going on there. I think also we have to understand that I think Corbyn was one of the major issues, but I don't think there's a permeable relationship between Corbyn and Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to know sometimes where one begins and one ends. 2017, there were lots of Leavers, Conservatives, who hated Corbyn, who hated, anti-socialists, who hated the policies, but they'd say, you know what? He's a Eurosceptic, and I'll give him his dues. He respects the vote. They would say that. So you know what? I don't agree with him, and it's something you hear a lot. It's like a very contrarian sort of part of the English-British psyche. I don't agree with him, but he stands up for what he believes in, and that's now gone. And so I think that the thing between Corbyn and Brexit is not necessarily as distinct a line as we might think.
I feel as though a lot of people who are obsessing about the leadership and talk of Corbyn, I'm not surprised that people were talking about Corbyn in the same way I'm not surprised that people were talking about Boris, their leaders of the party. People are also talking about the MP, people are also talking about the council, people are also talking about, the various policies. Like, I think, anecdotally speaking, I don't think that was as important. And actually, statistically speaking as well, I don't think it was as important as Brexit was. I think that it was this election essentially was a de facto second referendum, in my view. And I think the really important point as well is that, yes, when it comes to, I think I just feel as though a lot of the people who are talking about Corbyn as being a unique thing that was a problem, not on the doorstep, or a unique thing that was a problem as to why we lost. I think that those are the people either with a political agenda or the people obsessing about the wrong thing.
Or they've just looked at the results of the opinion polls.
Again, I want to know how many people were sampled. But also at the same time, I'm not surprised. People will talk about the leader of the party. People will talk about kind of political issues. People will talk about individuals. People will talk about the front bench. I had people mentioning to me, Diane Abbott, I had people, there were all kinds of different people being thrown into the mix because they're famous people. When people think about politics, they will think about individuals and they'll speak about them. Part of being leader of the party is having the responsibility of being mentioned on the doorstep, right? I don't think that was such a big problem that people went out and decided not to vote Labour. I think the bigger issue was Brexit, and it clearly was Brexit.
I mean, also, look, we're going to get on this with the data, I guess. We said it time and time again. I have no regrets in the last 4 years of what's happened. My one regret is I caved on a second referendum basically after the European elections. I should have stuck to my guns and said, it's a fucking daft idea. Why? 2/3 of Labour seats were Leave voting. 2/3 of Labour target seats voted Leave. Right, so of course, 65% of the Labour vote voted Remain, but we know because of the way first past the post works, 400 seats voted Leave. You don't want to be in a situation like Hillary Clinton where you win, the popular vote, but it's all concentrated in certain areas, and so that's where I think Brexit was the major issue. And look, that shouldn't be controversial. There's I think about 100 new Tory MPs. Right, there's an article on Conservative Home listing them. Go read that article, get their names, put those names into Facebook, look at their Facebook pages for their campaigns. All of them, their final video before the general election was, vote for me, let's get Brexit done, let's turn to really important things like the NHS. Yeah. No mention of Corbyn, it's about Brexit, and not in the formulation we saw previously, but actually as a way of attending to erosion of public services, austerity, etc. And get Brexit done. Yeah. Action verb. What does that remind you of? Take back control. And we were so stupid to fall into the precise trap that Dominic Cummings and the Tories High Command wanted. The exact same trap, to the extent where they used a tricolon, they had a 3-part word, get Brexit done, take back control. It was a mirror image. So anybody saying that wasn't the major factor, I think is being silly. Now, clearly, on top of that, Corbyn was an issue. Of course he was. But then let's look at the other leaders. Boris Johnson. There was a BMG poll shortly before the election. 32% of the public wanted Corbyn as PM. 39% wanted Johnson as PM. Actually, Swinson was less popular than Corbyn. The only national political leader who was popular was Nicola Sturgeon. Right? So, Trump in the United States in 2016, Trump was very unpopular. Guess who else was unpopular? Hillary Clinton. Maybe that's just an aspect now of modern politics with new media, etc. So I can't say that's the fame. How is that the primary thing when the guy who's just got a majority of 60 or 68 also was pretty unpopular. Clearly, that's not that big a variable. 50% of Tory Remainers still voted Tory for a hard Brexit fronted by a guy who's synonymous with all the most egregious characteristics of the British establishment. It's because the offer was they looked at it in the whole. They didn't just go, I don't like him, I'm going to vote for Joe Swinson. Nobody thinks like this. Only like 60 people who all live in central London and write for either the Observer or the Times.
I don't know if you have that much evidence for that statement that no one thinks like that.
Remarkably few people think like that.
Okay, another way of putting it, so let's say in September, Corbyn had, his ratings were -60, which meant that 16% of people were satisfied, 76% of people were dissatisfied. I think it went up slightly during the campaign.
No, it went up significantly.
He was on -60 at the start. I think he went up to about -40 or something.
No, it went up significantly. And also, you don't use approve. That doesn't mean anything. You ask people, who's your preference to be Prime Minister? There's two ways of measuring it. Approval rating, it doesn't mean it. I think he's doing a good job. You basically repeat the last thing you heard on the media. Who do you think is the best candidate for PM? Him and Johnson. It was closing the longer the election went on. That's the thing you should be looking at, because people are saying, who do I want to be the Prime Minister? They're not saying, I think they're doing a good job. It's a really abstract question, doesn't mean anything.
I think in a lot of the places as well that we're talking about, in the North or in the Midlands, etc., preceding this election, preceding even 2017, right, the biggest issue on the doorstep wasn't whether or not people were politically engaged enough to vote Tory or vote Labour. It was apathy. Like, it was a complete disillusionment. And I think that much as the independence referendum in Scotland was that trigger for a lot of people to then, decide that the SNP was going to be home, like, Brexit was that trigger that led to a lot of people saying, well, actually, I want some real change, and I don't think that the party establishment, is going to do it for me, except the Conservatives or maybe the Brexit party. And I think that, as you were saying, Aaron, like, either our voters stayed home or they voted Tory or they voted for the Brexit party, and the big appealing thing that they kept bombarding people with was about Brexit. So this idea, I just feel like the obsession over whether or not the leader came up on the doorstep is just, I just think is a complete distraction.
This guy literally called this the Brexit election. Come on.
What do you think of the data? So there have been a bunch of people, I suppose we'll have this conversation with Paul when he's on Wednesday as well. There have been a lot of people who are saying that actually, whilst it looks like because we lost Leave seats, the problem was adopting a second referendum, they've said, well, there's two possible things you can say to that. One, we would have lost more Remain seats had we not adopted a second referendum. And the other, which is a more subtle point, is that even in Leave seats, sometimes there were more Remainers that left the Labour Party than Leavers. So I think the data from Data Praxis is, whilst 900,000 to 1 million Labour leavers went over to the Tories or the Brexit Party, 1.3 million 2017 Labour voters went to Remain parties. To what extent? So does this challenge the narrative?
No, it doesn't.
People's vote that cost us the election.
Remain voters wanted to get this done. It was always a minority interest to have a second referendum. Yeah. Sorry, Huda, I just wanted to say that.
It's true. No, it's true. And I also just think that, I wish we could do a simulation where we could go back in time and we could be more Leave and then see how that plays out. But I think that obviously we can't. But just looking at how, the voter share and the swings and the fact that we lost because in a lot of Leave voting seats for being to Remain, and we didn't actually, lose in many Remain seats, even though we weren't full on back second referendum either. Like, we had a bit of a hodgepodge. We were full on back a second referendum. We were a hodgepodge of it. Like, a lot of people were still annoyed with us because we didn't just come out and say we wanted people's vote. And I think you could very easily say that we held that, even though we were equivocating on it for a long time. And a lot of people were annoyed who were massively Remain about us equivocating on it for a long time. But quite evidently, the people that came out and voted with their feet were the people who wanted Brexit and felt completely and utterly sold down the river by Labour not respecting the result of the referendum in its final result in terms of our Brexit policy in the manifesto. So I think that I just think it's not based in reality. I don't think it's based in feeling. I just feel as though we're speaking to ourselves in cities, in bubbles, when we say that, had we had backed a second referendum, that we would have been able to, the entire election would have been different, particularly because a lot of the people who voted for the Lib Dems and for the Greens, which people say, if it had been more Remain, then that margins would have transferred over, I just think is unrealistic and untrue and complete fantasy la-la land, because, people vote Lib Dem, people also vote Green because of policy differences they have with Labour and class differences and interests that they have that are better suited. So I think that the idea that, Remainers would have poured out, in Grimsby or in West Bromwich West to vote for the Labour Party, but if we'd gone for full second, people's vote, second referendum, then I think, I just don't think that's rooted in any tangible reality.
Let's look at a couple of clips. Obviously, many people have been asked, key figures in the Labour Party asked what their verdict is on what's gone on, what their, I suppose, diagnosis is of the problems. Let's go to John McDonnell, who was speaking on Andrew Marr about the problem of Corbyn's popularity.
Do you not acknowledge there was something about Jeremy Corbyn, and perhaps you, that a lot of traditional Labour voters did not like? Maybe it was the past support for Irish republicanism and Hamas and all of that. It might have been, but there was something there. I've got lots of quotes. I'm going to read you just one more from a Labour MP who was re-elected, your last MP in Scotland, Ian Murray. He says, "Every door I knocked on, and my team and I spoke to 11,000 people, mentioned Corbyn. Not Brexit, but Corbyn. I've been saying this for years. The outcome is that we've let the country down and we must change course and fast."
OK, I have a lot of time for Ian, but he'll admit he's not, from the beginning, was never really...
Well, he says himself.
He's never really the most solid Jeremy supporter, but there you are. However, he's reflecting what he had heard on the doorstep. I think that was about the media portrayal of Jeremy than the reality. But let's have the debate about the nature of our politics, the nature of the reportage of our politics, and the nature, I think, the way they treat individuals. Because it wasn't just Jeremy. They did the same to Ed Miliband. They did the same to Neil Kinnock.
So you don't think it's anything to do with the actual characters at the top of the Labour Party?
I think it's anyone who challenges the establishment will be portrayed in this way. Why? Because the establishment own the media in this country.
Okay,
however, that doesn't mean to say mistakes weren't made, and I'm sure there's elements of my politics and my character that could be taken apart. I accept that. But I think if you look at anyone who's challenged the system, of course the system will throw the kitchen sink at you, and that's what happened.
So during the break, Fox, our producer, was telling me how many people were polled in the Ashcroft poll that we've been working from. It's about 13,000. It's a legitimate, it's a decent pool. John McDonnell there is accepting that potentially leadership was a problem, but he's saying that it was in large part down to the media attacking someone who was anti-establishment. What do you make of his comments there?
I do feel as though he touches on a point that needs to be emphasised a lot more, and I think that one of the biggest thing to come out of this election, the biggest kind of grouping of people to come out of this election worse in terms of their reputation is the media, and how they have uncritically repeated propaganda that they know to be false consistently, and then how that affects public discourse, how that affects politics. Like I think that there's a lot to be said again by the way in which social media means that we all exist in little bubbles and we all just repeat things that we know the algorithm is all kind of made up so that we only see things that we agree with, etc., etc. But by and large, a lot of the stuff that was being reported by supposedly reputable organisations tended to kind of peddle an idea of Jeremy being dangerous, Jeremy not being allowed near the levers of power because he will not only break it but act, in some kind of nefarious way, insidious way. I think that's going to be a problem for any kind of like leftist. That's going to be a problem for any socialist coming after Corbyn, and it's something we either need to nip in the bud or see real reform in.
I mean, we're not going to be in government until the next time this happens, right? So, if there is reform, it'll be going in the opposite direction.
But I think that's the problem, though, right? Because I think that is, unless that changes, I worry about our messaging, being able to get to the people it needs to get to. Like, obviously, there's organising we need to do at the base, but by and large, how we consume media is important, and what is in what we consume is also important. Do
you think there's any chance that if the next leader of the Labour Party, as to be honest I expect it to be, is similarly left-wing to Jeremy Corbyn, that they could go into a general election a bit more unscathed and less wounded than Corbyn has been?
They don't even need to be left-wing. Gordon Brown was the Chancellor of Blairism. And the way he was treated going into the 2010 general election, the media said he was on antidepressants, he was blind in one eye. They went into his family history, what happened with regards to his children, into his past, into his temper tantrums, all sorts of things. You know what? Gordon Brown in many ways was destroyed by the media more than Jeremy Corbyn. They just had less time. They just didn't have 4 years to do it. They had about 2 years to really go for him ahead of 2010. So I don't actually think it's unique to him being a socialist. What we need to understand is only one Labour politician has become the Prime Minister in this country since Rupert Murdoch owned the Times and the Sunday Times, and since he moved the printing of the Sun away from Fleet Street to Wapping. That was, in terms of the media, analogous to the miners' strike. It was a decisive moment in the transformation of how culture is produced in this country. And only one person's done that. Who was it? Tony Blair. Tony Blair was the literal godson of... He was the godfather, rather, or Murdoch was the godfather to one of Blair's kids.
Other way around, I think. Tony Blair was the godfather to one of Murdoch's daughters.
How's that true? I mean, how old is she? That's correct. Well, I can believe it.
Well, I think Murdoch has younger kids than Tony Blair.
That's just crazy. Anyway, I can believe that. Regardless, they're incredibly, intimate. Before Blair became Prime Minister, he flew way around the world to get the endorsement of Murdoch. And so there's an argument to be said, well, that's what you have to do. There's no point having a Labour Prime Minister if they're indistinguishable from a Conservative Prime Minister. And so we need to understand that when Clement Attlee won in 1945, the Daily Worker, which is today's Morning Star, had a bigger readership than the Financial Times. The Daily Herald, the Daily Mirror were as big as the Express and the Daily Mail. Those were the four largest newspapers in the country by circulation. In the 1960s and early 70s, when Harold Wilson won 4 times, the biggest paper in the country by readership was the Daily Mirror. It was Labour supporting. So something really decisive has changed in the media in this country. And so people go for the easy sort of answers. Oh, Blair was this magician. Well, no, he was the only one who's responded in such a way to a changed media environment, which people on the left, I think ourselves included, would say very much limited that project. The Blair project could have gone far further on electoral reform, on council housing, on public services, on making the argument for taxation, etc., and it didn't, because it was beholden to Murdoch. So I agree with Huda. We have to have a strong. We've got 5 years now, and it could get worse. In 5 years, there might not even be the Daily Mirror
or the BBC.
Yeah.
Well, a whittled down BBC and a sort of version of Fox News.
And Channel 4. Channel 4 might lose some of its sort of sort of public broadcast kind of mandate that it has right now from the state, as does ITV. So, the social media dark ads could become an even bigger part of the electoral terrain. Things could get far, far worse, which is why, a political media project like this, but not just this, other ones as well, are key. And then confronted with that avalanche of vested interests which instantiate themselves through rigged ownership of the press, what do we have? The New Statesman, which couldn't discern between Boris Johnson and an anti-racist socialist. And we have The Observer, which instructed its readership the Sunday before the general election to vote for Sam Gyimah over Emma Dent Coad in Kensington. Gyimah gets 9,000 votes, comes third by a long way. Emma Dent Coad loses by 150 votes. These are the people who are purportedly on our side. So that's why I think media is such an important thing going forward for the left. If we don't do something about this, we have no chance.
Is there any way that the next leader can sort of show, or is there any chance that they can withstand some of those attacks? Because ultimately the media landscape is not going to be that different in 5 years' time, is it? You can build Novara Media, you can build Tribune, but there's still going to be a lot of people who are absorbing media through the nexus of the broadsheet press reflected via the BBC.
I think one sort of way in which we can work to mitigate this is sort of looking at social media, because and I think Aaron raised it earlier about how the Conservatives were able to utilise Facebook and utilise kind of like digital spaces in a way that I think that whilst we were also, I think, gaining a lot of ground there. I think that, how much was it in the last 3 or 4 days that the Conservatives supposedly spent just on ads that were very targeted? I think every time I went on Facebook or YouTube or something, it was like a massive Conservative banner. I don't know how many millions it was, but it was definitely like majority of its budget. Their campaign budget must have been spent in the last couple of days just like inundating people's social media. But I think that is a completely different terrain that nobody owns in a way. I think obviously when we look at Facebook and Twitter and the way that they behave, yes, they do a lot to kind of not challenge or stamp out some of the kind of very far right kind of creatures that we've seen emerging from various cesspits and pools across those those different terrains. But I think that could be key. Even if we don't have the BBC, if we don't have Sky, if we don't have all these major news publications, yes, creating media where we can, like you were saying, Novara, Tribune, etc. But I think getting a better grip on social media will be very, very important.
We've got a couple of tweets on the hashtag. Pat McClusker says, I think we need to be opening community centres in these seats we lost, offering food parcels, hardship support and political education like the Panthers. Louis tweets, Labour should have backed a soft Brexit, not a second referendum. Remain voters, I believe, are more likely to stick with Labour for their socialist policies. Leave voters want to get Brexit over and done with, and so voted Tory. It would have been the best choice. someone who agreed with Louis was Caroline Flint, a clip of which we are going to now. I think she was speaking to Sophie Ridge on Sky.
I'm emotional. I'm trying to stem my anger at Sophie in all of this. But I am emotional because I do believe that in the pursuit of Remain, a number of people who have been ardent Remainers in our party, on our front bench, people like Keir Starmer, people like Emily Thornberry, but many others, Hilary Benn, Yvette Cooper, they have contributed to sacrificing 59 seats. I think I said 40 we would lose if we pursued this strategy. 59 seats. But don't worry, we've got Putney and we've got Canterbury. With all due respect to the Labour MPs for those constituencies, I don't believe that was worth it. I'm emotional.
So there will be, from the sounds of it, it sounds like most people at this table kind of agree with Caroline Flint that the costs of the Brexit policy that the Labour Party adopted definitely outweighed the benefits. For me, I agree with that particularly just because I feel like even if you're undecided about which one would have lost more seats, it was just a bad policy. I woke up the next day, I was devastated at the Labour loss, but the one silver lining was, oh God, thank God we don't have to do that second referendum that we were offering.
Yeah.
I feel like there are a lot of people in the country who are just like, oh God, thank God we don't have to do that second referendum. But in any case, there's going to be a lot of, I suppose, disputing retrospectively and in hindsight whether or not the Labour Party should have had a different Brexit policy. Moving forward, though, is that kind of irrelevant now? I mean, at the next general election, Brexit will have happened. And can we just move on? Or is it important for us to work out precisely what went on here and how we came to have this particular position which lost us those seats?
I think it's important to investigate the framing of which, because I think actually it was Caroline that said or accused Emily Thornberry of calling, was it her constituents stupid or something, which I think Emily is, going to sue about. But I think it speaks to a trend that I'm seeing and that I'm very, very worried about, where you have a complete polarization in terms of discourse. And I think that a lot of this is what I'm seeing in people atting each other on Twitter. But I think it does speak to conversations and dialogue that people are having around Brexit. I think we just need to be very, very careful about. There's a lot of people that I respect that are going into camps of either calling, the working class that came en masse to vote for the Tories and vote for the Brexit Party, as you said, with the sole aim of getting Brexit done, are completely feckless, non-intellectual, are getting to a point where they're basically saying that there should be an intelligence test before you're able to vote. Really, have
you heard many people say that?
Oh God, I've mostly Remainers, I have to say, but it's just like a bubble.
People on Twitter,
this is what I mean. Twitter is a bubble. Twitter is a bubble, and I completely appreciate that. But I've seen people say that. But what I've also seen is a lot of people that I respect also on the complete opposite end, saying that the working class are morally virtuous and there's nothing that they could have done wrong, and that they, that we need to be following them off whatever cliff they want to go down, and fundamentally, essentially, almost saying that it's a homogenous white group of people, and that if we want to win, we're going to have to whatever viewpoints they have, kind of go down to their level in a way. And I think it's frustrating on two levels, because I think that there is. The one thing that I'm seeing that I'm mostly incredibly angry about is, again, this birth of the myth of the importance of the white working class and this special status of the white working class, which isn't helpful to anybody, right? But I think also just it's very paternalistic. It's very sort of patronizing. It's almost saying that you have a whole grouping of people who clearly for various different reasons decided, to vote for Brexit. But it wasn't the kind of Brexit that we talk about. There's a lot of people that I respect, that I love, that I know who voted leave, right? But they voted for very different reasons than some other people did. And I think that we can't just clump them all together and say that Brexit means the same thing for everybody. I think we have to really investigate what we need to be doing in our communities. And this is where it kind of goes back to creating that infrastructure in our communities where we can have these conversations. And I think the biggest missed opportunity is that I know that there is a left Brexit group now. I think it's called Left. I don't know what the acronym is. But the missed opportunity is that wasn't a lot earlier, and that it wasn't trying to shift the debate. Because I think that even regardless of what your political positioning is on Brexit, I think there definitely was a vacuum when it comes to the platforming of a socialist, kind of idea around why leave is important. And so I don't think we should take it as a victory. Anybody who supported Brexit or anybody who is in the party and felt as though the position wasn't right, I don't think we can celebrate the fact that people, by and large, proved us right in saying that they cared a lot about their leave vote and they would have loved and wanted the Labour Party to go with them and respect that.
I mean, how many times does Remain have to lose? You've got the 2014 European elections, UKIP come first. You've got the 2015 general election, the Tories and UKIP, between them get 49% of the popular vote. I know sort of the centre love to talk about PR. Well, if we had PR, they would have had a pretty strong mandate to have a Brexit referendum the following year. 2016, we get the referendum. It wins. We leave. 2017, two parties amass 80% of the popular vote between them, saying they'll respect the vote. 2019, we have a European election where the Brexit Party, which didn't exist 4 months earlier, then becomes the equal largest party in the European Parliament. The Liberals and the Greens do very well, but they're still far behind. Then 2019 general election, the Tories get a really big majority on the basis of saying they'll honour the vote. How many times is it going to have to be best of 15, 16, 17 before people say, well, and then people even now with this general election are saying, well, they didn't win the popular vote, well, because the Brexit Party stood down. They won the popular vote in 2016 because there was a literal referendum which didn't have any seats. So and it has to be repeated. The idea of a second referendum being this mass thing was never true. And the thing about, today 52% would vote Remain and 48% would vote Leave. If confronted with a second referendum or whatever, right? Still margin of error of the same result as 2016. But the idea of people actively wanting a second referendum, that was never more, the highest that went was like mid-40s, right? That's the highest it ever went. It was never a mass thing. And so I just think it was complete delusion. But what happened was the People's Vote campaign effectively became the fourth party of politics in this country. They set up a full-time staff of 60 people in Millbank. They had all these outsourced, arm's length operations, OFOC, all this stuff. They flooded the media. And the big consequence of that is they fucked Labour. Not just they fucked Labour, they helped transform the Tory party. That's what we have to understand. Because this polarisation of the electorate around Brexit was the final nail in the coffin for a moderate Conservative party, right? That kind of dies with Cameron in 2016. But obviously it's on live support with Theresa May. You've still got Amber Rudd. You've still got, the Shadow Chancellor, I've already forgotten his name, that's how quickly things move on, Philip Hammond. You had, Remain supporting Joe Johnson. They've all gone because of this polarisation. And the People's Vote operation fed into the exact cleavage that Nigel Farage and Dominic Cummings wanted. And it's destroyed this country. Earlier this year, we had the indicative votes around a customs union, right? Theresa May, historically weak. We needed a parliamentary majority. And a customs union, by the way, this really has to be stressed. A customs union would have stopped a free trade agreement with the United States. The US in these leaked, unredacted, recently published documents have said, we won't be able to have a free trade agreement with Britain if there's a customs agreement. They say that quite openly. It's a precondition. And so having a customs union would have stopped basically a sell-off of the NHS to American big business. Do you know who voted against it? Caroline Lucas. Do you know who voted against it? Chuka Umunna. Mike Gapes. Do you know who abstained? 10 of the 12 Lib Dem MPs. So I just can't believe these people. I really cannot believe these people. And so, we have to have an inquest into Corbin. No, we have to have an inquest into Caroline Lucas. The Greens are saying we need more Green MPs. What? To vote against a customs union so the fucking Yanks can buy the NHS? No, thank you. Actually, you know what? One Green MP is one too many. Thank you very much.
Wow. Wow. I mean, one Green MP is one too many. I wouldn't really agree with, but
what when they vote against the customs union, that now means we can have a free trade agreement with the US and we can privatise the NHS.
Well, I think that was a massive mistake on their behalf. But I mean, if we're talking about mistakes on Brexit, the Labour Party just made a big fat one, didn't they?
You've got one MP. That's all she's done. Yeah. It's not that they've got 20 MPs and 2 of them are fucked up. They had one MP. She voted against it. Even the Lib Dems abstained. Even 10 of the 12 Lib Dems abstained. She voted against it with the likes of Chuka Umunna and Mike Gapes and Anna Soubry.
I think as well, like, I don't think we should feed into this argument that particularly a lot of Tories are peddling, but in general is being peddled, that there has just been a decisive, massive shift, and that we've lost people and they're all gone into the Conservatives. And this is, I think when you look at, it's just not as simple as like red cities and towns or whatever turning blue. I think when you look at the big story here, it's the Labour vote collapsing. So it was ours to lose in some way. And I think that when our members and our supporters either vote Tory or vote for the Brexit party or stayed at home, it's a story of defeat and not one of Tory victory. And that is, I think, displayed by the very small kind of vote shares they got across the board. So stuff like, again, I think this kind of like
not in Bassett law.
But I think this feeds into kind of the wider conversation though, when people say, yes, it was a plethora of things. Yes, it was, decline, a steady decline for decades, but it wasn't unwinnable. Right, I think that with a better Brexit policy, I definitely think that we could have clawed a lot of those seats. But then again, is that something we need to pat ourselves on the back about, the fact that we could have hung on? And in a lot of places we did hang on, but the fact that we could have hung on to quite a lot of those seats by the skin of our teeth. Clearly, there's something else at play, something bigger at play, and I think again it's that decline, but also the destruction of institutions. The person who was writing in about community centres, etc. It showcases the importance of that, because this is a much bigger political problem that we need to solve, and it's going to take a lot more than a better Brexit policy to solve it. But it definitely, what we saw happen, definitely wouldn't have happened if we had a better Brexit. And I think anybody who is trying to argue with that, and a lot of people are, I've seen a lot of people, politicos who know kind of what they were talking about when they say things, usually have gone completely gaga and are saying that actually we should have gone for a full people's vote, and that would have made a difference. And it's just it's like the whole world is turned upside down sometimes when people talk about Brexit. But I think one thing is clear, that was the biggest contributing factor of our defeat in this election.
Do you not sometimes worry that the talk of, so going back to that tweet, I can't remember who sent it, but I don't want to, is that I sometimes find that the whole, we need to build community centres in these areas and do outreach, is itself kind of patronising, because it's saying sort of like, we have to convince these people of our positions. Like, maybe you just have to listen.
Maybe you have to listen. But this is the thing, it's not even about convincing, it's about organising, right? When we talk about CLPs becoming moribund, that's a problem, because that used to be a place where people talked about politics. And if people are in their own echo chambers, and it makes me really sad, because when we talk about the destruction of community centres, community spaces, communal centres, education was a big part of this as well, and in a way in which we're taught about ourselves and taught about the country. It's important, because that breakdown of the fabric of society and that breakdown in the bonds that hold us together. How are we going to organise as activists? How are we going to organise as anybody who wants something better for society if we're never seeing each other, right? That alienation does something. When people are working 7 days a week, right, just to get by, it does something that they can't come into community spaces, come into spaces in general where they can interact with other people. And it's not just about challenging people, it's also about amplifying the voices of people. So when people think about representation, for instance, and I sometimes get really worked up about it, because I don't think that representation for representation's sake matters, right? Like, I think what matters is representation when it is the product of community organising. But if you can't organise because there is no community to organise, right? It's not patronising. What I find patronising is just turning around and saying that, we should look at the working class as a homogenous group that are patriotic and nationalistic, and that we need to be much more socially conservative to pander to them. I don't think that's right either. I think that you have, in a lot of places that we've lost, you have an ageing demographic in towns, because I think this is a picture not just of Leave and Remain, this is a picture of cities versus towns. In a lot of places you have towns with an ageing demographic and a majority white demographic, but that is not to say that isn't, that's an irredeemable thing for us as people who are socialists. We can organise in them, but it's just you need the infrastructure to, and if the infrastructure, the apparatus in which we can organise around is gone, well, then we either have to create it, and that needs to be the biggest electoral strategic priority, right? We still do have a community organising unit, right? But again, that was concentrated largely in cities, and I don't think we did enough to reach out. And actually, when we look at the campaign as a whole, it was Momentum that was most aggressive about making sure activists left cities. And that, it should have been from day dot the priority of regions, and it wasn't. right? And I think in a large part it's complacency. In a large part it's saying that these are places we'd never lose. Even if we hang on by 2 votes, right? I don't think that is going to be something, that them turning blue, this city, this town, whatever, turning blue is possible. And I think it's essentially, that's to some extent what shot us in the foot. But
I mean, just looking back now at the sort of literally the thousands of people going to Uxbridge and Ruislip and to Chingford, thousands of people.
Yeah.
Like, looking back, how stupid was that? Now look, we all did it.
They were closer margins than a lot of other places.
But see, that's the problem, though. What was the point of,
You don't need 700 canvassers. There's literally not enough boards for 700 canvassers in a seat.
And I saw
they weren't doing anything.
I saw that. I turned up actually to, I think it was Kensington that I went to, and 600 people came. I've never seen 600 more excited people. It was great that they were there.
Yeah.
But then it was like, we only have 4 boards.
Oh my God.
And it was like, well, okay then. And then then the thing should have been that region, every single time, yes, when we look at someone like Pfizer, we look at someone like Ali, the candidate drew a lot of those people in because they offered hope. And the idea that we could unseat Boris Johnson, IDS, etc., gave people hope. But the big thing should have been that the region should have been, getting buses out there to, as soon as we get full up after a couple of hundred, you just smack everyone onto a bus and take them to Thurrock. It's not. Momentum did it. It's really not that hard. It should have been a strategic priority for the Labour Party, where I would say that is the biggest misallocation of resources in terms of the whole campaign.
But the thing is, with Labour and with region, so if people watching the region operation is, you have the southeast, southwest, etc., they're inherently conservative, small c conservative, understandably so, because they don't want to be the people that lost seats on their watch. So somebody, for instance, if you're in the south and you're responsible for Southampton Itchen, which was a marginal which Labour didn't win, Portsmouth South, which was a marginal which Labour held and did win, and Southampton Test, you're going to basically allocate resources to the ones you already hold, because you think, well, if I lose any, then I'd rather not lose any than actually take the chance of maybe winning one. But if actually the downside is always going to outweigh the upside. And so there is this very cautious approach with region where that wasn't ever going to happen, of okay, let's bust these people into these other sort of marginals and stuff. So something to learn. But yeah, you're saying they were winnable. 700 people in a seat is stupid. If you haven't got the boards, if you haven't got the data, if you haven't got a scalable model, which we didn't have, I shouldn't say it's over. It's not over, the election's over. Labour didn't have, it's pointless.
Let's go to some questions. Start typing your questions in. There's already a couple collected here. Thomas Allen Owen asks, would rebuilding Labour CLPs in communities all around the country help get around the constant onslaught from the print media, embed Labour as part of people's daily lives?
Yeah, I think CLPs have to be the nexus of a community. When we're talking about, and things are gonna get a lot worse. Things are gonna get ramped up a lot more. We've seen, for instance, food banks and other sort of when it comes to universal credit, etc., all these various things that people have done quite successful campaigns on the ground, and charities are doing a lot of work on. I think the big thing for CLPs is gonna have to be not just being space to have political discussions about the internal mechanisms of the party, even though that of course is important. It also has to be a place of refuge, of organising, of a linkage that kind of binds people together in communities. I think we have to be as ambitious as that. And in a lot of places, it's going to be very difficult because, like I said, those CLPs need a lot of work. But I think if we're as ambitious as that, then I think that's how you draw people in. Because if you're only talking to yourselves, then, yeah, I'm not surprised that, not many people turn up to your meetings. But if you're the centre of the community, and particularly because a lot of places, I have to say, I'm not really sure what the numbers are, but a lot of local Labour parties still have their houses, they still have property, and that can be used. That should be used. That should be a hub for the community. So yeah. Can
I just say a few quick things before we go to more questions? Firstly, Labour had a good campaign. I'm not talking about the manifesto. I'm not talking about the leadership, etc. I thought the manifesto was weaker than 2017's actually. But obviously, if you're looking at the poll of polls, Labour started election on 27, I think. They ended up getting 32% of the popular vote. So that one of our bets with Corbynism was it will be able to change the polls during an election period, which didn't happen to the same extent as last time. But actually, despite Brexit, despite a relatively weak manifesto, I think despite more negative media coverage this time round, it still went up about 5%. Second one is, actually there's 3. Second one is, this was almost testing to destruction the idea of organic social media reach versus paid. We still don't really know which. The sort of 2017 seemed to indicate, organic social media reach, momentum, etc., actually is probably more effective than paid if you do it right. We don't know if that happened this time. I suspect the negative advertising on Corbyn in Labour Leave seats was highly effective. And people are saying, well, I've not heard anything negative about Corbyn. And people say, well, I hear it on every door. I wouldn't be that surprised if literally every person in that constituency is getting just negative Corbyn-centric ads every single day. And then, and that's something we need to think about. Personally, I want to see an end to basically any sort of paid online advertising, political advertising in this country, because I think what we saw in this election was basically capitalist worker Facebook page. We don't know who's funding these ads. We don't know who's behind them. We don't know, who they're accountable to, etc. And then finally, there's this idea of big organising. Big organising, the Bernie Sanders stuff. And I suspect big organising is good enough to win you a primary in the US. It's good enough for Bernie Sanders to maybe beat Joe Biden this time. Or it's good enough for Jeremy Corbyn to beat Owen Smith in 2016. But I suspect it's probably not good enough to take on the entire establishment with vested interest behind it, with the media behind it, and also having a weak candidate in the eyes of legacy media, which was what Jeremy Corbyn ultimately was by 2019. It can't make up for all those deficiencies. It can add, as we saw, 5-6%, right? Which is great if you have a great candidate, great manifesto, great machine nationally. But in and of itself, I think we had an almost kind of messianic view of what might happen in the campaign. It sort of unfolded, but not entirely. And then I guess to finish, in terms of the national presence thing, we have to, or the left has to think about building an organisation here, which really pisses me off with the stuff about tactical voting. And, we need a progressive alliance. The fundamental question for working people since the early 19th century is the question of organisation. And if you're talking about tactical voting and quick fixes and you vote here, I'll vote there, or proportional representation, I support PR, we'll solve everything. You're not grasping the fundamental question which has plagued us through the Paris Commune, 1917, 1968, 1989, the question of organisation and how it relates to the state, and your theory of change and your theory of the state. And what made this look so absurd was The Guardian, the day after the election, saying, oh, Labour's lost, go donate a toothbrush to a homeless shelter, go give somebody a hug. Mm-hmm. I mean, my God. We are facing 5 million, kids in poverty by 2022. That's not a meaningful theory of change for me. And that's what we have to have. And that, it really is inimically linked to the question of organisation and building that organisation.
I mean, to be very brief, I think community organising, it has its value. But I think also to say that your CLP is going to become the centre of your community, one, I don't know how realistic it is, and two, it is an easy way out of saying we won't have to change any of our policies. Because sometimes if people, if people didn't like exactly what you were offering, then just saying, oh, well, we'll make our CLP more ambitious is potentially a recipe for losing again.
No, I don't think that's true. I think that if every CLP was active and was drawing in a wider kind of breadth of community, and I think in some CLPs you see that happen. I think you can see really successful community organising in some CLPs. But what I'm talking about is as things get worse, the Labour Party needs to be front and centre in offering change. And that was the case. Like I use again anecdotally that experience of that member that I met who'd said that 40 plus years ago, entire streets would be going to CLP meetings and that isn't the case anymore. It's, and that's because they saw not just the political, the Labour Party as the only political vehicle in being able to enact change in society, but it also saw, it saw community in the Labour Party. It went to the Labour Party meetings, people went to Labour Party meetings and they saw themselves reflected in it. And I think by and large, in a lot of places that we left, I would bet a lot of money that a lot of those were CLPs that were quite moribund. And I think does translate into something. When you talk about policy, the way in which policy is made to some extent, not just through conference, but also kind of in kind of putting pressure on the leadership, on the NEC. Again, a lot of that will have to do with having as many people as, not just as Labour Party members, but actually active in their local area, in their local communities, and being able to kind of push the party into a direction that's actually very, very good. I disagree. I think we have to be ambitious also. If we're not going to be ambitious, what's the point?
Also, can't we just do both?
Yeah.
Surely you don't think it's an either or, right?
No, that's why I say I don't think it's enough.
Yeah.
I think it's too easy an answer that people always settle down on. Oh, we need to make our CLPs more active. It's sort of like, maybe you're going to actually have to
do more. No, and I don't disagree. We shouldn't do more, but I'm also saying that I think it's going to be
or change a bit even.
I think it's gonna have to be front and center to what the party itself kind of says is important.
Someone's agreeing with me on Twitter, which is unusual, on the Tisky Sour hashtag. Watching Tisky Sour, I think Michael Walker gets it. Talking about attacks on Labour leaders, he said that new media isn't going to be big enough to fight against that in 5 years' time, which means we need a leader that isn't so easy for them to attack in the way that JC was. I would actually modify that slightly. Whatever left-wing leader we have, it is going to be just as easy to attack as Jeremy Corbyn. But I do think that it's for at least a year now, Jeremy Corbyn has been somewhat unable to respond to those attacks in a convincing way, and that has made him sort of hide from the press a little bit. And I think that it's an incredibly difficult task to manage an onslaught from the entire British establishment. But when you are up against all of that, you do have to be, exceptionally disciplined with how you respond.
I think leader of the Labour Party is probably the second hardest job in this country after managing the England national football team. It's a very much a poison chalice. You have, you have to really work hard at it, and so whoever comes next will be subject to a massive character assassination.
Okay, the next tweet is massively agreeing with you, Huda. Michelle, watching the incredible comrade that is Huda Elmi on Tisky Sour by Novara Media, she is so right, saying that we see a breakdown of the bonds that hold us together, and we need more organising in the periphery to fight alienation and create places where communities can be built.
Thank you, Michelle.
Can I also say as well about the I think people talk about the young and BAME communities. I actually just think they have higher levels of class consciousness than left behind.
I'm worried.
Left behind white working class.
No,
it's not a class. For me, the crisis happens in 2008. It temporalises certain economic relations in a specific way. So older working class people are more likely to own assets than younger working class people. They've seen their wages fall to a lesser extent. Pensions have been inoculated from wage declines, which we've seen across the working age population. They have a completely different relationship to credit. They have basically 0% interest rates on their mortgages. So young people have to get in debt. They're facing a very tough labour market. They're giving 50% plus of their wages to a landlord. So I think given those conditions, you're going to be more understanding of your class position. You are. I think that's also they're more working class. They, that comprehension is far easier to sort of grasp. I think.
I think we can't be complacent though, because I think it's complacency that's got us to a lot of the failures that we see today.
What's complacent about that?
No. What I'm saying is that yes, by and large, when we look at kind of ethnic minority communities in Britain,
I'm saying young people.
You mentioned BAME as well.
I said both. Because BAME is a separate issue. Young people.
But my point is that I feel as though we're going to go down a path of being complacent about BAME. And I know that's not what you were talking about, but I feel that because I don't know if you guys saw the Conservative Party candidate for Croydon, her campaign. No. It was one of the littest things I've ever seen. Literally. Was able to pull all these young people and kind of sorry, I've got this thing in my throat. Was able to pull lots and lots of young people to be part of the campaign. Lots of black disenfranchised
It was a young black woman who was the candidate, wasn't it?
But also was able to tap into the local megachurch, right? And be able to use that. Now I think that BAME communities by and large are much more interconnected by virtue of just the kind of oppression that they face, but also by virtue of the community bonds that still exist. Particularly kind of where it's interlinked in the cross-section between, we talk about various different religions, etc. I think that they're able to kind of hold together the bonds between each other by virtue of necessity, but also by virtue of just, again, when we particularly look at some of the seats that we've lost as well, the kind of segregation that we sometimes see between BAME communities and kind of their white counterparts. But I think it's interesting though, because I feel as though the Conservatives are doing a very, very good job of tapping into some sections of that BAME community and being able to light this fire of saying that we're able to offer you a lot more and that the Labour Party is taking your votes for granted. And I think whereas in the 80s we saw the same problem, the Labour Party takes our votes for granted, and the solution was to organise within the party structures to not just get representation, but to get meaningful kind of changes on policies that were going to be impacting ethnic minority communities. I think we have to do a lot more to be conscious of the fact that we can't take for granted, as we took a lot of voters for granted across the country, the ethnic minority community here in Britain.
Let me give you an example. So last year's local elections, I was canvassing in Sutton, South London, which is one of the places which could be Labour in a couple of years, maybe a decade's time, because of demographic changes. Household after household, nobody's interested. And you could very clearly see that race was mapping onto class in so much as statistically significant correlation between small household, lots of kids, very cramped, and they're more likely to be women. Just a fact. And again, statistically significant correlation, they were just more likely to be Labour voters. Partly because of economics, I think partly because of culture. So one thing, what can the Tories offer those young kids that you're talking about? Home ownership? Nope. Higher wages? Not really. A sense of national inclusiveness where they have the same opportunities afforded to them as a wealthy young kid that goes to Eton? Nope. So again, it goes back to sort of materialist understanding of what's happening. Since the crisis, building consent upon an offer of improving living standards hasn't happened, which is why Brexit's so effective, because actually the Tories now have managed to garner consent around something entirely different, entirely abstracted away from improving even people's living standards, to the extent that people were voting Tory in Labour Leave seats saying, I want change, I'm going to vote Conservative. Well, they've been in government for 9 years, because in their head honouring Brexit was a change from the status quo, it was that departure. Then secondly, I'm referring really to young people, and I agree with you, Labour can't take BAME people's votes for granted. I get very worried when I see sections of the left sort of view that this particular subject position in society is the most radical, revolutionary subject position. You're a black person, it says something half Iranian, you're Muslim, you are therefore this radical subject. You have this energy that nobody else can have. Your oppression necessarily maps onto your political agency. Bollocks, right? First and foremost. We've departed from a world where there is this historical agent of change, sadly, the industrial proletariat of the early 20th century. Working class people come in all shapes, all colours, all sizes. But young people, I think, is the big one, because they have a profoundly different experience of the economy. Just profoundly, profoundly different. And that's why you see this inversion by age of voter preference. And so I think that is a class analysis. Young people know there is really no future for them in this system. Whereas if you own a home, people who we don't know this. People who own homes have basically had 0% interest rates on their mortgages for 10 years. They've been paying less on a 3-bedroom house's mortgage than I'm paying for a 1-bed flat in South London, right? So of course they have a different relationship to use a Marxist term, the means of production. And of course, I'm going to understand my class position more than they are.
Paul C asks, we should do this as the last question probably. Paul C asks, Labour voters who went Tory or Labour voters who went Green, Lib Dems, Labour voters who didn't vote. So there's three categories of people. Which demographic is the most important for Labour to win back? I mean, in a very simple mathematical way, it's the ones who went Conservative, because every vote that goes to the Conservatives is a double loss, because it's one up for them and one down for us. But any?
I think you're right to some extent in saying that kind of mathematically that's important, but all of them. We've got 5 years. We're not going to have another election for 5 years, right? So let's be ambitious.
Yeah, probably don't disagree with that. You, all of them.
What's that?
Who should Labour be focusing on? I suppose another way of putting the question is there a tension between Labour focusing on winning back Conservative voters and winning back people who went to Lib Dems and Greens, or people who stayed at home? Is it the same message to all of them, or have they got to construct a bunch of different messages? Have they got to prioritise one over the other?
We had a massive surge of people registering to vote a couple of weeks ago, and then it turns out that a significant number of people who registered to vote never actually voted this time round. And that's the first thing that Labour needs to reach out to, is expanding the electorate. So that'd be my first thing is, look, I think this time we got, turnout went slightly down on last time, still actually quite high historically speaking, I think high 60s turnout this time round. For Labour to have a majority, which right now sounds crazy, you're going to need turnout of like 75%. You just are, right? Because the people least likely to turn out, the young, BAME communities, low-income earners, renters, these are our base. They have to be our base. It's not going to be bankers and fucking, buy-to-let landlords, is it? So that would be the first thing, is people who aren't presently voting.
Yeah.
Thomas Murr says, lol, why not mention winning back some SNP voters? We're going to save that for a future show. We're going to do a show on what happened in Scotland. Graham Judd asked, what policies does Michael want to change? I'm also going to save that for a future show, because I think we're going to wrap up now, and that could be a longer discussion. And I'm here most days. So let's wrap it up. Thank you, Huda, so much for joining me this evening.
Of course, thank you for having me.
You've gone down very well in the comments, as ever.
Thank you.
Aaron Bastani, thank you so much.
My pleasure. We had 2,700 people watching.
There are still 2,700 of you watching.
Crazy.
So make sure you
hit the thumb.
Hit the like button. Doesn't cost you anything. Hit the subscribe button. Tweet about this show. We want to, expand our audience, just as Labour need to expand the electorate. And go to support.novaramedia.com, donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, or maybe give us a post-election bonus so we can contribute towards building the left back up so we're ready to win in 5 years' time. And see you on Thursday. If you are in London this Thursday evening, then join us at Brixton Jam for the Novara Media Christmas party. Well, then, are you free on Thursday evening? Mm-hmm. Huda will be there. I'll be there. Aaron will be there. To get your tickets, go to buytickets.at/Novara Media. I'll be back same time tomorrow with Ash Sarkar and Ian Lavery MP.
And then Wednesday we've got Paul Mason in.
Yep.
Oof.
Big week.
Big week.
Good night.